The heat hit me first. Sticky and heavy like the jungle was trying to drag me down into the dirt with every step. I've been in places like this before. Cambodia, Nicaragua, Sierra Leone. But there's something different about the air here. Something thick with rot and menace. Every rustle of leaves and low animal growl felt more alive than it should, as if the jungle itself was watching me. It made me miss the deserts, the mountains, even the frigid Baltic winters. But that's the thing about a place like this. It knows you don't belong. I've been an outsider my entire life, so I'm used to that feeling. Born on the wrong side of Baltimore, the kind of place where you learned fast or didn't last. I never expected much of a future. I was 19 when the Marines pulled me out of a bar fight and gave me a gun. By 24, I was killing people who didn't even know my name. That's how the CIA found me. Quiet, efficient, invisible. The kind of man they could use. They gave me a name to match. Shade. Not a real name, of course. Just the only thing they'd let me be. Over the years, I've been called a lot of things. Assassin, operative, soldier. They're just labels. My job is simple. Go where they point. Kill who they tell me to. Disappear before anyone realizes I was there. No loose ends. No second chances. It's a job I'm good at. Maybe the only thing I've ever been good at. But this mission, this one doesn't feel right. 2 days ago, I was sitting in a dark briefing room in Langley, a cup of stale coffee in front of me, and Mason Trask pacing the floor like a caged animal. Trask is the Deputy Director for Covert Affairs, a title that sounds a lot fancier than it is. The guy's basically the cleanup crew for the messes no one wants to admit exist. He's the kind of man who can order a hit between sips of whiskey and not lose a wink of sleep over it. Shade, he said, dropping a thin file in front of me. This one's different. I opened the file, expecting the usual. A corrupt diplomat, a rogue asset, maybe a warlord stirring up trouble where we didn't want it. But the photo stopped me cold. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even close. The picture was grainy, taken at night. But the shape was unmistakable. Something long and coiled, its black scales glinting like oil slicks in the moonlight. It was buried halfway in the jungle floor, its body too big to make sense, and its eyes. Even in the blurry photo, I could see them, glowing faintly like embers. "What the hell is this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "That," Trask said, "is your target. We call it the Obsidian Serpent. It's been lurking near the Guantanamo perimeter for years, but it's getting bolder. 2 weeks ago, it wiped out an entire recon team, left nothing but shredded uniforms and blood. Locals talk about it like it's a god." "A god?" I snorted. I don't scare easily, and I sure as hell don't believe in gods. Trask didn't smile. "It's not a god, Shade, but it's not a normal creature either. It's smart, dangerous, and it's killing too many people for us to ignore. Your job is simple. Find it, kill it, and don't leave a trace." It didn't feel simple, but I didn't argue. I never do. I just packed my gear and got on the plane. Now, here I am, wading through a jungle that feels like it wants to swallow me whole. The sun is setting, and the shadows are growing longer, stretching out like they're alive. I grip the knife strapped to my thigh. Guns are useful, but I've learned that steel feels more reliable when you're up close. The jungle grows quiet as the light fades. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just silence, thick and suffocating. It's the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, that makes you think twice about every step you take. I don't stop moving, though. I can't afford to. My father used to say fear is just a leash you put around your own neck. He wasn't much of a father, but that stuck with me. I've made my career out of being the man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't break. But here in this place, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Not fear, exactly. More like the awareness of something bigger than me. Something older. Something that doesn't care about the difference between predator and prey. I stop when I see it. At first, it's just a shadow shifting in the trees, too dark and too fast to be natural. Then it moves closer, and I can see the way the moonlight slides off its scales. It's enormous, easily the size of a small car, its body coiling and uncoiling in slow, deliberate movements. Its eyes catch the light, glowing faintly, and I swear they're looking right at me. I don't move. I don't breathe. My instincts are screaming at me to run, but I know better. Running only makes you prey. This isn't a creature, I realize. It's a predator. And now it's hunting me. The thing doesn't move like an animal. It glides, its body too fluid, too deliberate. It seems to fold into the shadows and reappear somewhere else, its movements almost hypnotic. I feel my fingers tighten on the grip of my knife, the rough texture grounding me, reminding me to stay in control. But control is slipping through my hands like water. The jungle around me seems to hold its breath, the stillness unnatural. Even the trees, massive and ancient, feel less like plants and more like sentinels, looming in silent witness to what's about to happen. I don't dare take a step. I know the rules of predators. Sudden movements invite attack. I let my eyes scan the terrain instead, piecing together my options. The foliage is dense, thick with roots and vines that claw at my boots. To my left, there's a shallow ravine, slick with mud from the afternoon's rain. To my right, more jungle, stretching into a wall of impenetrable green. There's no clear path, no escape. The thing in front of me, it knows that. Its eyes lock onto mine. They aren't the eyes of an animal, not entirely. They're too focused, too calculating. Something about them makes me feel exposed, like it sees more than just my physical body, like it sees my thoughts, my fears. A cold shiver runs through me, something I haven't felt since my first kill as a young Marine. Back then, I thought fear was something you could conquer. I know better now. I take a slow breath, steadying myself. The thing is testing me. I've seen it before. Hyenas circling prey, wolves watching from the tree line. But this is different. This isn't a test of strength or dominance. This is a game, and it's been playing it a lot longer than I have. My fingers twitch toward the holstered pistol on my hip. It's a Glock 19, reliable, silenced, loaded with armor-piercing rounds. But I know instinctively it won't matter. The Obsidian Serpent isn't a target you take down with firepower alone. Whatever it is, whatever made it, doesn't obey the rules of flesh and bone. I think back to the file Trask gave me, the parts he didn't say out loud, but let me piece together on my own. The Obsidian Serpent wasn't just some mutated animal. It was old, maybe older than the jungle itself. The locals had stories about it, whispered in Spanish and Taino, their voices thick with reverence and fear. La sombra de la selva, they called it, the shadow of the jungle. A god of death, a spirit that punished those who ventured too deep into its domain. The accounts were always the same. Mutilated bodies, no tracks, no signs of struggle. Just blood, soaking into the earth like an offering. I'd dismissed it as folklore at first. I've seen too much, done too much, to believe in ghost stories. But standing here staring into those impossible eyes, I feel doubt creeping in. Maybe this isn't just an animal. Maybe it's something worse. The thing moves, just slightly, its coils shifting against the ground with a faint whisper of scales on dirt. My hand tightens on my knife. It's a tactical blade, custom-made, sharp enough to cut through bone. But it feels inadequate, like a toy against the sheer size of this thing. I force myself to think, to plan. If it attacks, I need to be ready. The knife isn't my best option, not yet. I need to create distance, find higher ground. My eyes flick to the ravine on my left. It's risky, but it's my only chance. The serpent moves again, its body flowing like liquid shadow. It doesn't make a sound, not even the faint hiss I'd expect from something its size. It's unnatural, And it's wrong. And it's getting closer. I take a slow step back, testing the ground. My boots sink slightly into the mud, but they hold. Another step. Careful. Deliberate. The serpent's head tilts, following me. Those ember-like eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It's waiting. Then the jungle explodes. A bird, small, panicked, bursts from the underbrush, its wings a blur of frantic motion. It's a stupid, meaningless thing, but it's enough. The serpent moves, faster than anything that big should be able to. It's on me in a heartbeat, its body a blur of black and silver. I dive toward the ravine, my instincts screaming at me to move, to get away. The mud gives under my boots, and I slide, half-controlled, down the slope. My hands scramble for purchase on the slick earth, and I feel the knife slip from my fingers, vanishing into the muck. The serpent is right behind me. I don't need to see it to know. It's in the sound, the way the jungle seems to part for it, the way the air itself feels charged with its presence. I hit the bottom of the ravine hard, the impact jarring but not enough to slow me down. I roll to my feet, mud clinging to my gear, and draw the Glock. My breath comes in ragged gasps, but my aim is steady. The serpent appears at the top of the ravine, its body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. I fire. The gunshot is muffled but still deafening in the silence. The bullet hits its mark, striking the serpent just below its glowing eyes. For a moment, I think I've won. But then it happens. Something I can't explain. The bullet doesn't pierce. It doesn't even leave a mark. It just disappears, absorbed into the thing's body like water into a sponge. The serpent tilts its head, almost curious, and I swear I see something like amusement in its eyes. I'm out of options. My mind races, searching for anything I can use, any advantage I might have missed. But there's nothing. No backup, no escape plan. Just me and this thing, alone in the heart of the jungle. And then, for the first time in years, I feel it. Fear. Not the manageable kind. Not the kind you can push aside. This is deeper, older, something primal that rises up from the darkest parts of my mind. The serpent moves again, faster this time, and I know. I'm not going to win this fight. The serpent launches itself from the top of the ravine, a living shadow slicing through the air. My instincts scream, and I dive to the side, rolling as its massive body crashes into the mud where I'd stood. The force shakes the ground, and for a moment I'm just a kid again, barely 20, pinned under an insurgent in Kandahar, fighting to stay alive. But this isn't a man. This is something much worse. I scramble to my feet, Glock still raised, but my hands are slick with mud, and the gun feels like it weighs 100 pounds. The serpent turns, its body unfurling like a whip. Up close, it's bigger than I thought, easily 20 feet long, its black scales gleaming even in the faint moonlight. And its eyes. God, those eyes. They're not just glowing, they're alive, burning like twin stars, and they seem to bore straight into me. For a moment, I feel frozen. Not by fear, no. This is something else. It's like the serpent is inside my head, rooting through my thoughts, my memories. I see flashes of my life, fragmented and out of order. My mother's funeral, the first man I ever killed, the time I let my guard down and watched my team get slaughtered in a Venezuelan jungle. The serpent is showing me every failure, every regret, every moment that ever made me weak. I grit my teeth, forcing myself to move. Weakness doesn't matter. What matters is survival. I fire again, aiming for its head. The rounds vanish, swallowed by its scales like raindrops on black glass. The serpent's body surges forward impossibly fast, and I barely manage to sidestep its strike. Its head smashes into the trunk of a tree behind me, splintering it like it's made of twigs. It's toying with me. I can feel it. Every move it makes is deliberate, precise, calculated to push me into panic. And it's working. My pulse is hammering, my breath's coming too fast. I've faced trained killers, warlords, men who would flay their own soldiers alive for sport. But nothing like this. It lashes out again, its tail sweeping through the mud. I leap, but not fast enough. The tail catches me mid-air, slamming into my side with the force of a battering ram. Pain explodes in my ribs as I'm sent flying. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked from my lungs. My Glock skitters out of reach, half buried in the mud. For a second, I can't move. My chest heaves, trying to suck in air, but it's like my lungs have forgotten how. The serpent looms above me, its body coiled, its head tilting in that eerie, almost human way. It's waiting, watching, enjoying the hunt. I force myself to roll onto my side, every movement sending knives of pain through my ribs. My hand brushes against something solid, my knife half buried in the mud. I grab it, the blade feeling too small, too fragile in the face of this monstrous thing. But it's all I've got. The serpent strikes, its head darting toward me like a spear. I twist, slashing out with the knife. The blade catches the edge of its jaw, and for the first time, I feel resistance. A thin line of black ichor seeps from the cut, glinting like oil in the moonlight. It jerks back, hissing, not a natural sound but something low and resonant, like the groan of a shifting glacier. The ground beneath me vibrates with it, and for a moment, I feel a flicker of hope. It can bleed. The serpent circles me now, slower, more cautious. I use the moment to pull myself to my feet, knife clutched in one hand, the other pressed to my side. My ribs feel wrong, like something's cracked or worse. But pain doesn't matter. Pain is just information, and I can work with that. The jungle seems to shift around us, the trees bending toward the serpent as if drawn to it. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, and the air grows colder, thick with something I can't name. My breath fogs in front of me, and I realize with a jolt that the serpent isn't just a creature. It's a force, something that bends reality around it. It lunges again, and I sidestep, slashing out with the knife. This time, I aim for its eye. The blade connects, and the serpent jerks back with a guttural roar, its body thrashing wildly. I'm thrown off balance, stumbling into the mud, but I see the damage. Its left eye is ruined, leaking that black ichor like molten tar. It's hurt, but it's not done. If anything, the wound seems to enrage it. The serpent coils tighter, its body rippling with a terrible, unnatural energy. The shadows around it deepen, and for a terrifying moment I think it might simply vanish into them, disappear and strike from nowhere. But it doesn't. Instead, it rises, towering above me, its one good eye burning brighter than before. And then it does something I didn't expect. It speaks. Not in words, exactly. The sound that fills the air is more like a vibration, a deep, resonant hum that echoes in my skull. But I understand it somehow, as if the meaning is being forced into my brain. You think you can kill me? I don't respond. There's nothing to say. My grip tightens on the knife, my muscles coiled like springs. I know I can't win this fight. Not here, not now. But I can survive. And sometimes, survival is enough. The serpent strikes faster than I can react. Its tail catches me again, slamming into my legs and sending me sprawling. My knife slips from my grip, lost in the mud. I roll, scrambling for anything. But it's on me. Its massive body pinning me to the ground. Its head lowers, its ruined eye dripping ichor onto my face. The glow from its remaining eye blinds me, and I feel its presence pushing into my mind again, dredging up every memory I've tried to bury. I see my father's belt, my mother's coffin, the faces of every man and woman I've ever killed. But I'm not done yet. My fingers find the edge of something solid, my Glock buried in the mud. I grip it tight, aiming blindly at the serpent's mouth and fire. Not one shot, but the entire magazine. The recoil jolts through me, and for a moment the serpent freezes. Its body trembles, its mouth opening in a soundless scream. Then it releases me, recoiling into the shadows. When I sit up, gasping for air, the jungle is silent again. The serpent is gone. But I know it's not dead. Not yet. I don't remember how I got back to my feet. Pain lanced through my ribs with every breath, my body screaming for rest. But rest wasn't an option. The serpent had retreated, but I could feel its presence in the jungle, stalking me, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. My knife was gone, swallowed by the mud, and the Glock's slide was locked back. Empty. All I had left were my instincts and a battered body that had no business still moving. But survival has a way of ignoring logic. Survival is ugly, desperate, and relentless. It doesn't care how broken you are. The jungle around me seemed darker now, the moonlight barely cutting through the canopy. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a warning. I stumbled forward, forcing myself to move. If I stayed here, it would find me. It wanted me to stop, to give up. That was how predators worked. They waited for you to collapse under the weight of your own fear. Not me. Not yet. I moved uphill, the ravine giving way to rocky ground that promised better footing. The terrain was rough, but it gave me a height advantage. If I could just find a vantage point, a place to force it into the open, I might stand a chance. My training told me that every enemy, no matter how powerful, had a weakness. I just had to find it. The air grew colder as I climbed, the shadows around me thickening like a storm was gathering. My head pounded, my vision swimming with exhaustion and pain, but I kept going. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a clearing at the top of the ridge. Moonlight bathed the rocky ground, illuminating a cluster of jagged boulders. It was perfect, a place where I could use the terrain to my advantage. But it was also exposed. If the serpent came for me here, there'd be no running. It would be a fight to the death. I reached the center of the clearing and collapsed against one of the boulders, every breath a struggle. My fingers fumbled through the pouch on my belt, pulling out the one thing I had left, a single fragmentation grenade. I'd packed it as a contingency, something I'd rarely needed on missions like this. I pulled the pin halfway and held it tight, my thumb pressing down on the safety lever. The grenade wouldn't save me if the serpent struck first, but it could buy me a chance. A small one, but a chance nonetheless. The jungle was silent again, that awful, unnatural stillness that pressed in like a physical weight. I scanned the tree line, every nerve on edge. It was coming. I could feel it. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the quiet. Then, the shadows shifted. It came from my left, moving faster than I could track. One moment the jungle was empty. The next, the serpent was there, its massive body coiled like a spring. Its one remaining eye burned with fury, its wounded socket oozing black ichor that dripped onto the rocks. I didn't wait. I threw myself to the side as its head struck the boulder where I'd been sitting. The impact cracked the stone, sending shards flying. My ribs screamed in protest, but I rolled to my feet, clutching the grenade like a lifeline. The serpent turned, its body uncoiling with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. It didn't hesitate this time. It surged toward me, its tail sweeping low like a scythe. I jumped, just barely clearing the strike, and landed hard on the rocky ground. Pain flared in my ankle, but I ignored it. There was no time. I backed toward the largest boulder in the clearing, keeping my eyes on the serpent. It followed, its body gliding over the ground like liquid shadow. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was furious, relentless, its movements less calculated than before. It wanted me dead, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. I reached the boulder and pressed my back against it, the grenade still clutched in my hand. The serpent lunged, its mouth open wide, rows of jagged, impossibly sharp teeth gleaming in the moonlight. This was it. At the last second, I dove to the side, leaving the grenade behind. It clattered against the rocks, the pin fully pulled, the lever releasing with a faint metallic click. The serpent's head slammed into the boulder, its massive body curling around the stone. For a split second, everything froze. Then the grenade went off. The explosion tore through the clearing, a deafening roar that sent me sprawling. Heat and force slammed into me, and I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing. Dust and debris filled the air, and for a moment, I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't move. When the smoke began to clear, I forced myself up, my entire body trembling. The boulder was shattered, pieces of it strewn across the clearing. And there, lying in the wreckage, was the serpent. Its body was broken, its black scales shredded by the blast. The glow in its remaining eye was dim, flickering like a dying flame. I took a step forward, clutching a jagged shard of rock I'd picked up from the ground. If it was still alive, I wasn't going to give it a chance to recover. The serpent's eye flickered once more, and then it went still. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the remains of the creature. My chest heaved with every breath, my body on the verge of collapse. The jungle around me was silent again, but this time it felt different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything. I was too exhausted, too broken to process what had just happened. All I knew was that I was alive, and the thing that had hunted me was dead. But as I turned to leave the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle was still watching me. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, I thought I saw something move. By the time I stumbled out of the clearing, the adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow, aching emptiness in its place. My ribs screamed with every breath, and the gash on my leg, when had that happened, throbbed in time with my heartbeat. Blood and mud clung to my skin, and the sharp copper tang of it filled my nose. But I was alive. That thought kept repeating in my mind, as though I needed to remind myself. I'd survived. The serpent, that impossible thing that defied every law of nature, was dead. I'd seen it with my own eyes. And yet, as I limped through the jungle, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The quiet was still there, oppressive and wrong, like the jungle itself was holding its breath. The serpent might be gone, but its shadow lingered, a weight pressing down on everything around me. I kept moving one step at a time, using the shattered remains of trees and vines for support. Every so often I'd stop and glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see those glowing eyes burning through the darkness. But there was nothing. Only the jungle, vast and indifferent. It took hours, at least it felt like hours, to reach the extraction point. The sun was rising by the time I broke through the tree line and saw the faint glimmer of the CIA drone hovering in the distance, its rotors almost silent against the dawn. Relief flooded through me, but it was dulled, muted, like every emotion had been smothered by the events of the night. The drone descended, its sleek black frame reflecting the first rays of sunlight. A voice crackled in my earpiece. The extraction team, confirming my identity, directing me toward the rendezvous site. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was too dry, my voice too hoarse from hours of breathing jungle air thick with smoke and rot. When the drone finally landed, a hatch opened, revealing a small compartment. Medical supplies, water, a satellite phone. I collapsed against the side of the craft, fumbling for the water first, then the phone. My hands trembled as I dialed the encrypted number. It rang twice before Trask picked up. "Shade," he said, his voice sharp, controlled. "Report." "It's dead," I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The serpent. It's gone." There was silence on the other end. I could imagine Trask sitting at his desk in Langley, his fingers steepled, his face betraying nothing. Finally, he spoke. "Good," he said. "Your extraction team will be there within the hour. Stay put." "Wait," I said, my voice stronger now, anger creeping into the edges. "What the hell was that thing, Trask? What was I hunting?" Another pause. Longer this time. "It's classified," he said. "You don't need to know." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. "I just killed it, Trask. I deserve answers. You'll get them when you're debriefed, he replied, his tone colder now. For now, stay alive. That's an order. The line went dead. The hour I spent waiting for the extraction team was the longest of my life. The jungle stretched out around me, endless and suffocating, and for the first time in years, I felt small, insignificant. I'd always believed that survival was a matter of strength, of skill, of refusing to give in. But now, sitting there in the shadow of what I'd faced, I wasn't so sure. I thought about the serpent, about the way it had moved, the way it had looked at me. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't just a monster. It was something else. Something I didn't have words for. And it was dead because of me. But at what cost? When the extraction team arrived, 3 operatives in black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind helmets, I didn't say a word. They loaded me onto the drone, patched up my wounds, and handed me a clean uniform. One of them, a younger guy with a nervous energy, tried to ask me what had happened. I ignored him. The ride back to Guantanamo was silent. I stared out the window, watching the jungle fade into the horizon, the clearing where the serpent had died disappearing from view. But the feeling of it, the weight of its presence stayed with me. The debrief was quick, clinical. A sterile room with a single table, a camera mounted in the corner, and Trask sitting across from me. He asked the usual questions: how I'd found the serpent, how I'd killed it, whether there were any witnesses. I answered mechanically, my mind still replaying the events of the night. When it was over, Trask leaned back in his chair, studying me with that same cold, calculating gaze he always had. "You did good work, Shade," he said. "The threat is neutralized. That's all that matters." "Is it?" I asked, my voice low. Because it didn't feel like it. Trask didn't respond. He just stood, gathering the file in front of him. "Get some rest," he said, heading for the door. "You'll be reassigned soon." They let me go after that, back to my temporary quarters on the base. A small room, bare except for a cot, a desk, and a single window overlooking the jungle. I sat by that window for hours, staring out at the trees, my mind racing. The serpent was dead, but the questions it left behind wouldn't stop. What had it been? Where had it come from? And most importantly, was it really the only one? A movement in the trees caught my eye. Just a flicker, a shadow shifting where there shouldn't have been one. My heart skipped a beat and I stood, my hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. But when I looked again, the shadow was gone. The jungle, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. Days passed, but the weight of the jungle never left me. I wasn't allowed to leave the base yet. Standard protocol, they said. They needed to debrief further, ensure my health was stable. In reality, I knew what it was. They didn't trust me. They thought the jungle might have done something to me, changed me in ways they couldn't yet measure. And maybe it had. The nightmares started the second night after the mission. They weren't normal dreams. They were vivid, visceral. I was back in the clearing, standing over the serpent's broken body, but it wasn't dead. Its eye opened, burning brighter than before, and the jungle seemed to rise with it, the trees bending toward the serpent like worshippers before a god. The ground beneath me shifted, roots coiling around my legs, dragging me down into the earth. And all the while I heard it, low and guttural, a sound that wasn't speech but still carried meaning. "You didn't kill me." I woke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The base was quiet, the faint hum of generators the only sound. But the dream lingered, the echo of that voice reverberating in my skull. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I went looking for answers. Trask, of course, wasn't on the base. He'd left the day after my debrief, probably back to Langley to file his report and move on to the next crisis. But there were others. Scientists, analysts, people who didn't know how to hide the truth as well as he did. I found one of them in the mess hall. Dr. Elena Reyes, a biologist with a background in cryptozoology, a field I didn't even know existed until I read her file. She was part of the team tasked with studying the serpent's remains. I cornered her by the coffee machine, keeping my voice low. "What was it?" I asked. She didn't flinch, but her eyes darted around the room, checking to see who was listening. "I can't." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "You can't tell me you're not curious. You've seen it up close. You've studied it. What was it?" Reyes hesitated, then sighed, setting her coffee down. "It wasn't just an animal," she said finally. "We don't even think it was terrestrial." "Not terrestrial?" I repeated, the words sounding ridiculous even as I said them. "You're saying it was alien?" "I'm saying it doesn't fit into any known taxonomy," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "The scales, the physiology, even its cellular structure, it's all wrong. It's like nothing we've ever seen." "So where did it come from?" I pressed. "Did it just crawl out of the jungle one day?" Reyes shook her head. "That's the thing. The legends about it go back centuries, maybe longer. The Taino people called it a shadow god. They said it wasn't born, it was summoned." Summoned. The word stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I thought about the way the serpent had moved, the way it had seemed to manipulate the jungle itself, bending the environment to its will. It wasn't just a predator. It was something more, something tied to the land in ways I didn't understand. I needed more answers, but Reyes clammed up after that. She knew she'd already said too much. I tried pressing others, analysts, soldiers who'd been stationed near the jungle, but no one would talk. It was as if the base itself was conspiring to keep me in the dark. Then, on my 5th day back, I got a call from Trask. "Shade," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of impatience. "Your next assignment is ready." "My next assignment?" I said, anger flaring. "You haven't even explained the last one." "There's nothing to explain," Trask replied. "The threat is neutralized. Your job is done." "That thing wasn't just a threat," I said, my voice rising. "It was something else. Something bigger. You know it, and you're not telling me." Trask was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone was cold. "You're asking questions you don't want answers to, Shade. Let it go." The line went dead. I didn't let it go. That night, I broke into the base's classified archives. It wasn't hard. I've spent my career getting into places I wasn't supposed to be. The files were buried deep, encrypted and locked behind layers of clearance, but I found them. And what I found made my blood run cold. The serpent wasn't the first. There were records, brief, fragmented, of other creatures, other anomalies, encountered in remote corners of the world. A massive winged beast in the Andes. A hive of spider-like creatures unearthed in Siberia. A humanoid figure spotted in the depths of the Congo, its body shimmering like liquid mercury. Each case was labeled the same, Project Umbra. There were no conclusions, no explanations. Just reports of destruction, death, and a single directive. Contain the threat at all costs. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. The jungle, the serpent, the other creatures, they weren't isolated incidents. They were part of something larger, something global, something we weren't prepared for. I thought about Reyes's words, about the idea of summoning. Had we done this? Had humanity, in its endless hunger for power and knowledge, called these things into existence? Or had they always been here, waiting for the right moment to emerge? I didn't have answers, but I had a sinking feeling that the serpent was just the beginning. On my last night at the base, I stood by the window, staring out at the jungle. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the treetops. I told myself I was imagining it, that the shadows weren't moving, that I didn't see the faint glow of an ember-like eye deep within the trees. But as I packed my gear and prepared to leave, one thought stayed with me. The jungle had let me go, for now, but it wasn't finished.